Welcome to the journey of an aesthete, a comprehensive examination of all things aesthetic, the arts, the humanities, and what it means to be human.
Television premiere motion picture. The ABC Friday Night Movie.
Yes.
Hey.
It's good to talk to you after so long. It's been, I think we last spoke in December, way back.
It was a while ago, yeah, because I remember I was going to Berlin, and that was in February.
Wow. It's amazing how everything going on.
Yeah. I'm not that amazed. It's like the longest 2 days of my life in 10 years at the same time. Like it feels like no time has passed and nothing but time has passed. You know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. I was just talking to a friend today about one of the many effects of the virus, and we were trying to decide if it's making time disappear and go real fast or opposite, slow. And I came up with the theory that the pandemic is actually making time fly by. And the reason for that is that, see what you think of this theory. Normally in life we have occasions and breaks, like a break from Monday, work week, Saturday, weekend, anniversaries, graduations, these kinds of special occasions. Mm-hmm. What the pandemic has done is it's made every day and morning and night all the same. It flattens everything. So it actually destroys occasion. And so what occasions do is they slow time down. It's humans' way of actually, this is a bizarre theory, I know, but it's human way of actually taking a pause artificially. And we don't have that now. So it's making everything really fast.
Well, that's kind of interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's weird because it's like, well, 6 months have gone by, but they've also been like excruciating. Like I can't wrap my brain around time anymore. So yeah. I just kind of stopped.
Oh, yeah.
I just let the day happen.
Yeah. That's
all for the best.
Yeah, for the best. But enough about that. So what did you, my plan was to follow your system on your Made for TV Mayhem podcast. And I love your system, and I think it applies for our movie, which is Intimate Strangers from 1977.
Yes.
So, Amanda, would you like to start as if we were on your show and you were the host?
Yeah, I don't have a synopsis or anything like that, like a plot breakdown. But, yeah, I mean, let me think of how to start. I mean, so... Intimate Strangers is a pretty important film. It's one that I'm ashamed to say I hadn't seen before. And I think I probably didn't see it because it looked like a downer. And it is. Yeah. That's not to say that it's not a great film. There are plenty of movies that are very downbeat, that serve a purpose. And if they don't serve a purpose socially like this one does, maybe they serve a purpose artistically. Who's to say? But like A Case of Rape, Intimate Strangers is doing something really important by bringing the dialogue of a really important and sort of hushed domestic issue into the forefront of our brains and into the dialogue. It essentially became water cooler talk, right? So, and it allowed women in these positions to maybe feel like there was opportunities to remove themselves from these situations, and if not, at least to feel like somebody understood them. Mm-hmm. So that's what I would say about the movie. What would you say about it?
Well, I'd say a lot. Well, I think it's a great film, and I think if we're going to talk about John Moxey, it's one of his best films. I think. I really do think that. I think he really achieved something with this one. something
he did.
special and above and beyond his normal output.
Well, have you ever seen Nightmare on County?
Yes.
So, okay, so that's an exploitation movie aesthetically, I would say. But I think at its heart, it's also dealing with a lot of really dark issues. And some of his movies do that. That's the one that came to mind instantly because it is dealing with race issues and in a way, domestic issues, because while they're in prison, the prison is treated like a domestic space, right? Yep. And it's also about sort of like the tyranny against women, right? And like what kind of power can like these sort of evil, highly placed white men do? And so I think a lot of TV movies are coded in different ways. Like another one that comes to mind is Through Naked. Now these aren't dealing with the same kind of deep social issues, but something like Through Naked Eyes is also positioning women as sexually autonomous, right? And so like I would say John Moxley made a lot of really interesting movies that probably, if you wanted to look at them in a different way, would probably say something interesting. This one is overtly doing it, and it's maybe not as good as, but probably as important as A Case of Rape.
Oh, it's interesting. That's interesting. So I do think, I mean, he's a consistent director, clearly.
Yes.
I just think there's something about the performances of this. Dennis Weaver, Sally Struthers, Larry Hagman. You know what I mean? And there's something about the direction, everything coming together, and the way the story is told that it just, for me, is utterly unique.
Oh, yeah. And this is probably one of Dennis Weaver's best performances. And I mean, he's had a lot of incredible performances, but this, he's walking a real fine line in this movie because he's not a very likable person, but he managed in some places not so much, to maintain a sympathy. And that's real hard to do. Yeah. And he's not painted in black and white at all. And I think he walks that line tremendously well. And Larry Hagman, too.
Yeah, well, I think that's one of the strengths of the film. In fact, it humanizes everybody, and it makes it in it. And I actually even like it better than The Burning Bed, believe it or not. But
I can see that.
I love this film. I think the film is a masterpiece, and I hold it high.
Well, tell me how you came to this film.
I really don't know. That's a really good question. I really, really don't know. I don't know where. It just spoke to me. I think I saw it probably in syndication. Probably that would have been in the 90s sometime, I think. And it really, I thought it was just great filmmaking. I actually, in 2012, I wrote an essay on it, and I liked it so much.
Oh. And
I go into great detail about its, about the scene of Larry Hagman and, the two co-workers picking up those women, and then and Tyne Daly. I should have mentioned Tyne Daly's really extraordinary in this too.
Yes, she is. She was nominated for an Emmy for this, so
that's excellent. That's excellent. Do you have any other information about that? I know that you're really good with analytics and
there's not a lot of information about this movie, and it surprised me because when A Case of Rape came out, it did get a lot of press, and it was an interesting time because it came out, it actually post-dates another rape movie that was made for TV called Cry Rape, I think. Yes. I always get that title mixed up. And they aired about 3 or so months apart, but Case of Rape was the stronger film, but they came out in sort of almost like this vacuum of it was time, right, to start talking about these issues in real ways. And then a lot of other kind of movies dealing with rape came out, but handled them maybe not so delicately. And then as we moved on and understood rape better, then the Case of Rape type films started coming back, and they were stronger. But this movie, although it did air a year before another movie called Battered, which is interesting because the original title of Intimate Strangers was indeed Battered. But there wasn't a lot of information about this movie at all, and it's really hard to find production information about TV movies in general. They weren't very well documented unless somebody did an interview for a newspaper and they talked about it, or sometimes you see a production note in Variety and you can kind of get an idea of when it was produced. And there was a little bit that came out about this because I think Sally Struthers was leaving All in the Family at the time, and was looking at other episodic work, and only half-hour episodic. She said she didn't want to do hour-long episodics, but I think TV movies were allowing her to kind of spread her wings. And although I think Gloria was raped on All in the Family, wasn't she?
I have to confess ignorance of that. That's something I should know.
I think she was, because there's that famous episode where her mom almost gets raped, and there's a conversation about it later where I think
that's right.
Gloria alludes to it.
That's right.
And so in this era, she was making a lot of TV movies. She did Ham Alive, My Husband is Missing, Intimate Strangers, A Gun in the House, which is another amazing film.
That is
probably my favorite.
Yeah, that is a good one.
It's a really intense one. And then doing things like Archie Bunker's Place and All in the Family, and then eventually Gloria, right? And so, but I think she, like a lot of actresses from this era who were doing sitcoms, was using TV movies to find, not find, but for audiences to see her in a different light. And she did a pretty good job. I don't know that it led to other bigger work for her per se, but she did a lot of solid work in this era. But in terms of, like, aside from them just saying that this was a movie she was making sort of as she was thinking about leaving All in the Family, there wasn't a lot of information about this movie. And that's not unusual. So when I write about these, when I podcast or write about these movies, sometimes I find it's maybe better to talk around the movie instead of talking about the movie. And so with something like Intimate Strangers, it's almost like more important to understand the cultural climate of spousal abuse in this era than maybe to understand the film itself, like when it came out and how they got to each other. Like, I don't know any of that information. And but also it might be important to note too, and I may have talked about this last time I was on a show, I can never remember, but when I lecture, I talk about demographics, and women were the largest audience for TV movies. And when I mean largest audience, I mean the largest sought after audience by advertisers and by the networks. And so television was always sort of made for women from its creation till today. And so although you saw things that were very male-centric, like Mandrake or The Amazing Spider-Man or something like that, or there was a lot of stuff that was dealing with a lot of issues in the domestic space because women in the 70s hadn't yet really set out to have a life outside of the home. And so movies like this, and this is the first of its kind as far as I can tell. I tried to go back and, like, on IMDb, you can actually search by keywords and plot points, and you can look up things by their year of release. And this is the only movie that comes up, right? It's the first one every time you look up spousal abuse, domestic abuse.
That's interesting.
And so
that's interesting.
Yeah, and so it hadn't really been done before, and it did really well with audiences. It came in at number 8 for the week. It ranked at number 8. It had a Nielsen of 24.7/43, which means almost half of America was watching it on the night it aired. And I think it opened up a real dialogue for people, like A Case of Rape did. And so it's interesting that it doesn't have the same gravitas, I guess, that the other one does. Like, I don't know why this one's lesser remembered, because the issue is just as important, but for some reason it kind of got swept under the carpet. Yet I think it's had more legitimate home video releases than A Case of Rape. So I don't know why it's like that, but it did have a VHS release. I actually have the old clamshell VHS release of it, and it was streaming on Amazon actually recently. So yeah, it's had a home, but but to talk about the film itself, it's kind of like we'll just have to talk about that era of the telefilm, I guess. If that's
I could get it deep into the film. Like, so the first thing you see is this Winnebago, and Dennis Weaver getting all excited about his Winnebago and his kids and making sales, right? And he's saying, "Hey kids, this Winnebago," and he and his wife had this discussion about money and can you afford it, and there's a kind of, the sun's out. There's just a kind of it's brilliant because it's sort of there's a happiness to it.
Yeah, so for sure.
But my thing about this movie, I think this movie is better than a lot of movies, and I mean that it's artistically better. So in other words, it constantly undercuts itself. So, there's things about Dennis Weaver that you might find unlikable, and they come out, and then they get withdrawn, and then they get withdrawn, and then you start to see things from his point of view at work. He's really stressed at work, and you really feel for this character, right? And then you have this moment of violence. It's actually the most explicit moment of violence I've seen in a TV movie, actually, I would argue. When he throws his wife, and it's a lawn scene. It's one of the most disturbing. I think I wrote in my essay that it makes The Shining look like a ghost story, a tepid ghost story movie, The Shining, in comparison.
Yeah.
I really do think he's that monstrous. And so for me, for Dennis Weaver to do that, in reaction, he doesn't sleep with this woman. So, he does this thing that a lot of audiences would consider virtuous. He doesn't go to bed with this woman that he picks up, right? He comes home, and yet he starts screaming, and he starts beating up on his wife. It's just, it forms a portrait where the audience of this TV movie has to start, I think, doing work.
Right.
And
I would agree.
That's the downer aspect of it. But see, to me, that aspect of it makes the movie not a downer. It makes the movie kind of exciting and kind of illuminating, because you're having to do work with this married couple and these kids, and it's just it's very different than Paul Le Mat and Burning Bed. I love Paul Le Mat. Burning Bed's a wonderful film, but there's more of a one-dimensionality. It doesn't go to the depth,
right?
And that's the thing. And I have a theory about why that is. So for me, this movie is one of the earliest of its kind. So they hadn't figured everything out yet. Because they hadn't figured everything out yet, it makes the movie better.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Isn't that interesting? You can know too much about something, and then it becomes a formula. And so it's that sweet spot of the era that it came out. And there's that discussion with the attorney, well, rape is not considered rape inside marriage. That's even talked about in this film at the end of the film.
Right.
And just everything is so smart in the writing, but there's no real resolutions. There's a therapy session, but you don't get a sense. The movie ends, and it's almost like the audience has to do some work. Like the movie respects the audience's intelligence, and that's kind of what I'm trying to say about it.
Well, no, I agree. And it does something very special because, so for instance, I think we as a society, if we see a woman getting beat, there's a level of sympathy that we hold for her. But if she chooses to go back, then all of a sudden it's like all bets are off and there's something wrong with her. And I think this movie is very delicate in showing that sometimes that does happen. And it's like, you have to, when you're talking about like doing the work, you have to check yourself, like how complicit, and Case of Rape does it too. You have to ask these questions about yourself, like you're complicit in what society does to these women, right? And so like, then you have to question, why do I do that? Why am I judging these women who go back instead of trying to support them and help them through this, right?
Yeah.
And so, and the way it ends, you're never quite sure if they're going to get back together or not. And I think that's really important because they say at the beginning, they clarify that he had been abusive before, but he had gone several months without hurting her. And so they were already in the middle of a very abusive relationship and doing their best to work through it. And so we get dropped into their life at what seems like an okay time because we think at the beginning he's doing better financially with his job, and he's coming into this really big account that's going to bring all this money where he can buy this dream Winnebago. And she seems touchy, but a little bit more able to confront him, right? If she's unhappy with something, like you get the idea that she actually has somewhat of a backbone and she's learning to use it. And these last several months, they've somehow navigated these tricky waters together. But then things start to fall apart, and it goes right back to, I'm assuming, what it was like for them before we met the characters in the film.
In that Winnebago scene, she wants to go have a quickie with him in the Winnebago.
That's right.
And he's totally offended by it. He's like horrified. And his reaction is really one of horror, and it's interesting. It's a little moment. If you're talking about women going back, that's what they talk about in that therapy session. Like a woman is in that scene. Every woman gives a theory. They all talk. So actually, the very thing you're discussing gets talked about for like 15 minutes, which is really something.
Yeah, there's another movie that kind of does that. Maybe not as delicately. Oh, I can't remember the name, but Meredith Baxter Burney's in it. Is it The Stranger with My Face, maybe? Where she finds out she's adopted and she goes to find her mom. And I feel like there's a therapy session with kids who've been adults who are dealing with being adopted. And that's a great venue. I guess
for this. I mean, see, I had forgotten about that, but boom. Amanda Reyes, you came up with that. Meredith Baxter Burney, this scene, that's great. I have to, now I have to go back and look at that because I haven't.
I think it's that movie, but it's like that's a really great way. And I have a feeling that those scenes are in a lot of things. Like I feel like, and I can't remember it well enough, but the couple who wrote this and created Dynasty of all things, and we can talk about that in a second because it's really.
I'd love to because they're brilliant. Yeah.
Because there's some problems with it, but like Sarah T. Portrait of a Teenage Alcoholic came out before this, and they wrote that, and I feel like there must be therapy sessions in that one, and that was that was like the #1 TV movie or something the year that aired, and that was dealing with an issue too, that the first of its kind, which was teenage alcoholism, which was in the 70s, to my surprise, I just found this out recently, was a very new issue because we believed that teenagers could be alcoholics because alcoholism is supposed to take years to develop. And then all these kids with dependency issues were showing up everywhere in the 70s, and they couldn't figure out where this epidemic was coming from because percentage-wise, there were more teenage alcoholics than there were adult alcoholics. And so this movie, Sarah T., tackles that pretty frankly, I think. I'd have to rewatch. It's been a long time since I've seen it. But so they were really good at kind of taking these very hot topics and portraying them in fairly realistic ways, especially in the venue of television, where you're worried about censorship, right? And they managed to like navigate those waters too, very, very delicately, I think.
Yeah, but you said you had some problems with something they had written. You said
well, they created Dynasty, and I'm not a huge Dynasty fan. I've only seen like the first couple seasons, but I do know that Blake rapes Crystal somewhere in the first couple seasons. I just watched the first couple seasons a couple years ago, and then he buys her like a necklace, and then it's like the rape is forgotten. And I was shocked, and it made me not want to watch the show anymore because Blake Carrington is supposed to be this very heroic, patriarchal, whatever, and it's like I can't do this. And so, and I know that's me 2020, and I'm not trying to if people love Dynasty, I want them to love it, you know.
Well, I have to confess, I'm totally Dynasty ignorant. I really, really am. So I'm totally Dynasty ignorant. But
I only know these first couple seasons. I'm more Dallas based.
Yeah, exactly. JR, who shot JR is more important.
Yeah, that's my thing. But I was shocked when I saw that, and it made it really difficult for me to go back to the series and look at Blake in the way that I think they wanted us to look at him. And so I was surprised to see it was the same couple. But they also did a lot of really interesting things. I mean, Sarah T is the one that sticks out to me the most, but they did an adaptation of East of Eden, you know, and they wrote for like Longstreet and Medical Center and some really cool stuff. It's just that really floored me because they have such a astute understanding of things in Intimate Strangers. So to see it sort of, you know, kind of washed away like that, I was like, wow, that's surprising.
Well, that's from my limited understanding, those kinds of mistakes in character or treatment of rape was common in that era, right? In script.
Yeah.
I understand it's common in soaps, which is something you're an expert on.
Yeah, it's problematic in that oftentimes the rapist becomes the romantic hero later on, like Luke Spencer on General Hospital would be the prime example of that. But at the same time, because soaps are on for so long, the character can develop. Like, for instance, not to get off topic, but Todd Manning on One Life to Live was a serial rapist.
Oh, wow.
And it was a really intense storyline, but he was so popular that they developed him into kind of this romantic kind of leading guy. But because the show was on for so long, it took time developing him. And at the end, when he'd been on the show for like the character, different actors played him at different parts. At the end of it, like 2 decades after the rape of Marty Saybrook, which was the main storyline he came from, he sees Marty, and she said, you know, it's clear she's never gotten over exactly what happened, and they talk about it. And so you're looking at 20 years of fallback from something horrific that happened with both perspectives, right? And so that's what makes it okay. Not okay. It's not okay, but that's what makes it more tolerable for me in soaps, because it's not like it just happens and it's forgotten about, as it was on Dynasty and nighttime soap, because they are a once a week format. But on a daytime soap, you can spend years. There was a soap opera what's it called? I think it was called The Secret Storm, that is based off of the first season was about a woman who I don't even think is ever in the show. She dies in a car accident, and for the first decade of the show or something like that, everything is about what happened because she died to that family, and how they all fall into these different bad behaviors and destructive things happen and whatever. And so soaps can really deal with these issues in ways that other things can't, So it can't, I think it is, when you look back, yes, Luke Spencer is not a romantic hero, but that they did deal with it in a number of different ways on the show, which at least gives it some perspective.
Yeah, well, it's really totally understandable to me why someone would object to a whole bunch of things in commercial narratives in general. Because I think commercial narratives, by virtue of being commercial narratives, have problems anyhow.
Sure.
If that makes any sense. I don't know if that, so.
I think so.
Yeah. What I mean is that, like a commercial narrative like Intimate Strangers is sort of taking people that are supposed to be every person. So Sally Struthers is supposed to be a suburban woman, I guess, right? Tyne Daly is supposed to be an independent architect woman who's her best friend. They make jokes about how hot they thought Dennis Weaver was in his youth and all this. And there's a kind of a universality to it. Like there's something the audience can identify, this is your best friend. Those are like types in society. So really, really popular commercial narratives like Intimate Strangers, that's their stock and trade, are these kind of very universalizable, almost allegorical types. Now,
it's shorthand, right? So that we know where we are.
Right. Now, that's actually the brilliance of them as art forms. That's also the vice. So this is the Libra in me. That's both what's wonderful about them. It's also what's wrong with commercial narrative. It's both a vice and a virtue. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm really fascinated by that because when I did the commentary for Don't Be Afraid of the Dark, one of the things that I mentioned in it, and it stood out to me watching the movie over and over again for the commentary, was that Jim Hutton's character, we don't know what he does for a living. We just know that he has a office job of some sort with some responsibility. Yeah. And he throws out these names, and I can't remember the names, but he's like, Smitty needs the account on Thursday. And even though we don't know who Smitty is or what the account it consists of, we understand where he is in that place and time, right? And so, and it's the absolute most shorthand you could possibly have, to get you to up to speed on who Jim Hutton is. And I loved it. It's like 2 sentences where he literally talks about these really generic named people with these really generic accounts. And yet I fully understand the whole situation. And so I'm really fascinated by, because TV movies do it really well.
Oh, yeah.
And you're right, they do have to, because TV movies come into our living rooms. A lot of TV movie filmmakers and producers were looking to sort of reflect the everyday lives of people, right? It was more attractive to them. And so, and people would relate to it instantly. So especially when you had those early TV movies that were like 74 minutes long, you just have to drop them into that little universe. And there's no better way to do it than to just make them look like the person watching the film. Right. And so there's a lot of shorthand in TV movies, and I love it. And I agree with you, it can be its vice as well. And that's really interesting.
When I say vice, I mean something very particular. I mean vice only if your point of view is wanting to remake the wheel. In other words, it's a vice. It's a vice if you're like, say, in the avant-garde and you want to create like a totally new kind of movie. Then it's a vice. But it's all.
It's possibly a vice though, because you do have to follow a certain pattern, and sometimes you get stuck in the blueprint and don't know what to do. Yeah. That makes it stand out, right? And so I could see it being a vice that way too.
Yeah. But that's a very narrow definition of vice. That doesn't make it. I mean, there's something. There's to me nothing more beautiful. If you do something really beautifully that perfectly captures something, and so this my podcast is called Journey of an Aesthete. After all, right? I see this aesthetically. So for me, I'm totally moved by this movie with Dennis Weaver. I'm totally moved. I'm just devastated by it, and I feel like I learned something from it. About being human, about a marriage, and it's just because the movie takes the time to go really deep into these people's lives, and it's just really what to me the whole point of the thing.
Oh yeah, no, I agree. It's very nuanced. It makes me think there's a movie I don't know if you'll like it or not, but it came out I think in the late 80s or early 90s called Family Sins with James Fiorentino. Have you seen that?
I have seen it.
That reminds me of this film in that, well, because Dennis Weaver's character, I think, is very three-dimensional in this. And I love when you complicate something because we all have good and bad sides of us, right? And so it's really important to reflect that. And I think James Fiorentino, it's his best performance, I think, in Family Sins that I've seen. But like, just briefly, if your listeners haven't seen the film, it's about this couple that are kind of, I don't know if he's abusive, but he's got a lot of problems and he's a little aggressive, and they've got these two kids, and one of the kids, the older one, has something kind of, things aren't connecting right, and he's kind of getting ignored, even though he's done these really horrific things. Like I think he killed an animal at school, and the teacher tells the parents, and it's sort of like what looks right makes it right. So if we don't act on these things, it'll go away. And then they go out to this lake and this horrific accident happens. And I won't say much more than that because I think people need to see the film. And James Fiorentino plays this very unlikable person that has a lot of likable traits. And it's, I've never seen him quite like that. But speaking of Dynasty, he came off of Dynasty, right? And he was famous on that. And so I know him as more of an over-the-top kind of performer, Dead and Buried, The Possessed, like a lot of those movies. And that's what makes him so good. But in this movie, he's really under the radar. And it's such an intriguing performance because, like you talk about how the movie makes you work, you really have to work with that because you're constantly being pulled back and forth on how you feel about this man and how complicit is he in these things that have happened, that have destroyed his family. And it's harrowing. It's a harrowing film. Yes. And it's doing all this amazing stuff. And when I was watching Intimate Strangers, I actually thought of Family Sins quite a bit. They're two totally different films, but I think that the lead actors are doing something really important and they're doing it very well.
Yeah, they may not be that different as I think about it. If you think about Fiorentino and Dennis Weaver, there's some similarities, don't you think? They're as actors in a way, no?
I think so because I'm used to Dennis Weaver being a little over the top too, and I don't mean that to diminish his talent, but like, certainly not on McCloud, but like in like, right. Don't Be Afraid of the Dark. Not Don't Be Afraid of the Dark. I'm sorry. Don't Go to Sleep is a very like over the top performance, but that's also perfectly played because that's a movie about a family dealing with the loss of a child. And there are very raw moments in that. And in that rawness, and he's an alcoholic in it, in that moment, it all comes out because he's the man, right? Because I made a note about toxic masculinity and the kind of roles that Dennis Weaver played in the telefilm. And the other movie that came to mind was Cocaine One Man Seduction, right?
Oh, I love that film. That's a wonderful film.
And that's also a very over-the-top performance. But when I say over the top, I mean it's big, but it has to be big because he's this guy that's losing everything. Yeah. And it's a larger-than-life problem that he sort of brought on himself. And so he portrays it that way. And that's kind of how I'm used to him in these sort of dramas. And so this movie, he's very understated. And so is James Fiorentino, right? Oh, yeah. So, yes.
Well, Cocaine Man Seduction is better than The Boost with James Woods.
No, I haven't seen The Boost, so I couldn't say, but I think it's a great film.
What I mean is that here is this little TV movie. It's not as famous as The Boost with James Woods and Sean Young. That movie gets all the awards and acclaim. But the real movie about the effects of cocaine is this little TV movie that Dennis Weaver was in the early 80s. It just goes to show you, sometimes the TV movies are the ones bringing it, again, which you know to be true, right?
Yeah, for sure. They don't always end well. They do. I think as the years went on, after we got out of the 70s, I think the movies tended to like to have happy endings. But in those early days, there's just, you weren't sure what was going to happen to everybody. And so that's what was part of the pleasure of those films. And to be fair, 70s movies in general were kind of like that because like I always think about, do you remember in the 90s when there was like the revival of the disaster film and like Volcano came out and Dante's Peak? And they were huge and they're fun, but you always knew watching Twister that Bill Paxton was going to make it to the end of the film in Helen Hunt. Like, you didn't question it. But you watch Earthquake or The Towering Inferno or Poseidon Adventure.
I have no idea what those movies.
Yeah, and so there was so much suspense in that, and they didn't mind killing these really famous actors in these films, you know, and you were shocked by the end of the movie. And so I think the 70s TV movie was following that pattern. So you didn't always get out alive.
No.
And that made them super memorable that way, you know, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, it would be really a great purgative after watching Intimate Strangers to watch Valerie Harper and Dennis Weaver in The Day the Loving Stopped. Are you?
Do you know, I have never seen that, but I know of it for sure.
Yeah. A TV movie you haven't seen all of them yet. But
No, there's like 5,000 of them. I've seen like 600 maybe. So I'm working my way through them.
That's all. Everybody needs an anchor in life. You, me, just everybody. Anchor made this whole show possible. I'm immensely grateful to them. You too can use Anchor to make your own shows and create your own vision. Download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. What was it like doing a Charlie's Angels episode with two people who were not Charlie's Angels fans?
Well, I didn't know that going in, and I think it was great because, you know, the more I love Charlie's Angels, the more I love it. And so that they were so open to it. I just assumed they'd seen the show because I thought everybody had seen it. That was in our age group, right? So
yeah, but a lot of people aren't even like, I'm a fan, like you're a fan in a way of that, but a lot of people didn't register. It's just sort of like, yeah. So I guess you're spreading the word, right, by doing that show.
I'm trying to. Well, you know, Charlie's Angels is a special kind of series though too, because like they've tried to recreate Charlie's Angels over and over again, like in the movies with Drew Barrymore, and then they've had a couple of different TV series attempts, and there was one I think in the 80s that never even made it to air, or if it did air, it was just a pilot movie with Téa Leoni.
Wow.
And then later on there was that one that only lasted like a couple episodes that was just recently in the last 10 years. And they're constantly trying to get that lightning in a bottle. So even though I think Aaron Spelling was sort of disparaged by it because he got the nickname, you know, Jiggle TV or whatever. But that's the show that everybody, like, in his entire career, it's his most successful show, he said in his book, but it also the show that I think a lot of people remember the most. And that's because shows like Family were dealing with really important issues, but Charlie's Angels was doing the same thing, but in a really entertaining way. And so it could be watched a number of different ways. And it made, I think those types of series and movies are more enduring, I think, than other types of movies and TV shows.
Well, Aaron Spelling was so conscious of all that, right?
Yeah, for sure he was. Yeah, I think so.
Just brilliant in vision and inventiveness to do that. I mean, the fact that he did both Family and Charlie's Angels is in itself, you know, that shows you the man, right? It tells you that the nature, you know.
The diversity that came out of him, and that you're right, because like when he created Honey West, I mean, we look at Honey West and we're like, oh my God, Anne Francis is so beautiful and look at all this fun stuff. But she was really one of the first female leads in that kind of series. Mm-hmm. And so like, and he was setting out to do that because he had been told that women can't lead a show like that. And he was like, I don't believe that. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to prove you wrong. And it took him a while to really build the formula to where he got with Charlie's Angels. Mm-hmm. But like, he was definitely working Mod Squad. You know, they wanted Peggy Lipton in there. You know, I mean, he really understood that he was inserting progressive ideologies into mainstream programs, and that people were consuming them and learning things from them. Yeah, for sure.
It's really a shame in the case of Charlie's Angels, because I think people that don't get the show are people that actually haven't watched the show.
Yeah, I would agree.
They have an idea about the show that was fed to them by somebody that's actually totally disconnected from the show.
Yeah, because you can't say that they're not beautiful women, and sometimes they wear sexy clothes, but that wasn't really like the heart of the show, you know? And so I feel like people look at the superficialness of it. And I think you're right. This sort of idea of like how it was being portrayed in the press probably like influenced opinions on it. And that's unfortunate because it's a really damn good show.
Yeah, but also part of it too is I think that beauty aspect of it is actually one of the strengths of the show. Because the whole premise of that show is that these are figures that are really everything at one time. They're doing these police activities, and they wanted to be everything. Wouldn't you say so?
Yeah, well, they were definitely autonomous, and like they didn't have love interests that really filtered in too often in the show.
Yeah.
And I think it was the best way at the time for Aaron Spelling to get a show like that. I mean, maybe this is a really broad statement that I can't back up with any facts, but maybe without Charlie's Angels, we wouldn't have had Cagney and Lacey, right? So, like, you have to start somewhere, and sometimes to start somewhere, you have to mainstream these things until they become normalized, and then when they become normalized, then you can start inserting other types of things into the formula, right? And then people are already used to it, and then they're more likely to acquiesce to it or to consume it in a different way, a more positive way.
Yeah, I mean that's the nature of, I guess, producing something. When you have a goal or a vision, like I guess Aaron Spelling he had a vision of he wanted to. He thought big, right? He wanted to sort of change television. He wanted to do something. Right, he didn't like to be told no. He did. The last thing he wanted is anybody tell him you can't do this, you can't do that, and people don't want this and don't want that. He has vision. He wants to create something.
He also had compassion and empathy. Mm-hmm. Like and I talked about it on my own podcast, but he was very sympathetic to older actors losing out on work because they just turned a certain age, and he was very sensitive to that. And so he used a lot of his episodic programs to bring on a lot of these older actors, and his TV movies clearly did that as well. And so, yeah, he thought big, but he also was like, everything he does has like this sort of humanity to it, to me. And that's what I always see when I watch his stuff.
Yeah, he never forgets his background and experiences. He wants to put them in his, growing up as he did and what he experienced as a young man, as a kid. He brings all that with him to the projects he does.
Yeah, he's just a really important, kind of underrated television figure for me.
Absolutely. So going back to Intimate Strangers, is there anything else you want to say about Larry Hagman or Tyne Daly or about?
Well, I mean, everybody's at the top of their game. And I think Larry Hagman, like I said this earlier, is just as good as Dennis Weaver because he's also a complicated character, right? So he's not good to his wife, because he cheats on her, but he's also not an abuser. And the fact that the universe that Dennis Weaver's character exists in, he just assumes that there's abuse going on because Larry Hagman jokes about it. But it's so normalized for him because of his father, right? Yeah. And that's another thing they do is they spend time with Dennis Weaver's past, which is really important as well. And so when at the end of the film, when he's talking to Larry Hagman and he's like, I don't remember exactly how he words it, but he's basically telling Larry Hagman, yes, I beat my wife. I mean, doesn't everybody, And Larry Hagman's like, I'm going to get up off the stool and I'm not going to talk to you anymore because no, but that's not a normal thing. And no, we don't do that. And it's really interesting because he does cheat on his wife, right? So that that complicates him. And I like that. And I like Larry Hagman's performance too. It's just really top-notch stuff. I like Tyne Daly a lot in it as well, but I don't know that she's ever been bad in anything. So she's just top of her game.
She's incapable of giving a bad performance.
Yeah, and she's got this quality to her. Amazing. Like when she first comes on screen, you just really like her. She reminds me a little bit of Zora Lampert. Huh. And Zora, they even have the same smile. But Zora Lampert is, when I saw Let's Scare Jessica to Death, which is the first thing I saw her in, I instantly was drawn to her, and I instantly kind of loved her without even knowing anything about her. And she's just got this presence and this sort of attractiveness to her that I just find her appealing. And Tyne Daly is also appealing in the same way. They just have a quality to them that draws you to them, and that kind of makes you just like them instantly. And so she's great for this role, but even she's complicated too, because it's like she's a friend and she's a really good friend when it comes to standing up to the husband. But when it comes to giving Sally Struthers the ultimate compassion that she needs, because she may go back, she doesn't have it in her to approach things that way, she's like, it's all black and white for her and she can't figure out why this woman will return. And a lot of us are thinking the same thing, but it complicates her performance too, because she's supposed to be her friend, and ultimately she kind of lets her down, I think.
That's interesting. So that happens in the last act, right? You see that there's a little bit of she's going to the house to get the toothbrush. And there's that amazing scene where she talks to him and says, I know a dozen women that would have loved to have married you, or, thrown someone under the bus to get close to you, right? When she confronts him, look what you've done. Really great scene. Getting the toothbrush, but at the same token, there's a limit to her sympathies or her friendship. And where do you see that? And it's an interesting observation. Where does that happen?
Well, I think I see it as that's just how we are, because if we don't experience, I feel it's empathy, right? If we don't experience somebody else's problems, sometimes it's hard for us to understand them. And also we have these preconceived notions about what they should do. And yes, she should leave that house. I mean, he's doing horrible things to her. Right. And it goes beyond just beating her. I mean, he rapes her. And to us, that's the most horrific thing in the world. But it's her ultimate decision how she has to handle her life. And as a friend, you can help her learn how to get out of the house or do what she needs to do to survive. But you also have to be there for her if she doesn't do it. And I don't know how you do that, but I feel like as a friend, you have to try to extend yourself in some way. And I don't know that Tyne Daly's character necessarily had it in her, but I think she understood it too. I mean, they talked about it. But I guess because I misremembered that part of the movie. I didn't see, you were sensitive just to, I guess, a limitation on Tyne Daly's part. And I guess I was asking you informationally when they're in the car together. Okay. I don't even remember where they're going, but she's either picked her up from the hospital or something, and they're sitting in a car and they're having the conversation. Yeah. And Sally Struthers is very delicately and very maturely kind of trying to say, this is my life. And I need to make my own decisions. And Tyne Daly has like rolled up the window on that. She's like, no, this guy is horrible and I don't understand it. But the very fact that she doesn't understand it, it's like she can't extend herself past that moment. You know what I mean? And so it sort of complicates her, not as much as like the Larry Hagman character, but it does complicate her.
Yeah, it's difficult because it presents the audience with an ethical conundrum. And that's what, for sure. Yeah, and that's ethical. So in the audience, you're like, well, I've been in her shoes, and the ethical conundrum of, do I conduct an intervention? Do I force somebody for their own good? Right, that spirit of like, what are the limits of friendship, or what are the boundaries? Well, can you even force her though? Because I mean, at this stage of society, like there were so there's a little bookended voiceover narration where they talk about how few shelters there were, and at the time, I think only 14 states had funded shelters, funded by the state, and so like. There's only so much that Tyne Daly's character could have done legally. Yeah. Right. With Sally Struthers, I mean, they were doing the most that they could, but even she was told that it's not really rape because they're married or whatever. Yeah. Right. So you're seeing this brick wall. Yeah. And so even if, so you're saying an intervention, but I think that's an intervention in 2020 eyes. I just don't know in 1978 if they even understood what they could do, but you can be someone's friend. Sure. Sure. But I guess without judgment. Well, the fact that the TV movie kind of brings that up for the audience is really something. In other words, that becomes in the film a question to reflect on. You can ask yourself, well, what is a friend, or what is friendship? What is virtue? Those kinds of very sort of almost kind of nerdy, kind of philosophic questions. Put framed in that kind of way. But even just general questions if you knew Dennis Weaver just in the real world as that character and you didn't know what was going on in his home life, you would like Dennis Weaver. Like there's nothing dislikable about his persona outside the house for the most part. And so you struggle with it. It makes me think of Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye. Because I love it. The little girl in that has been raped by her father. Yeah. But there's Toni Morrison spends like at least one chapter telling the love story of her parents. And before it all falls apart. And it's this really sweet story. And then he goes on to do these horrific things. And it's because people are, I keep using that phrase, but people are complicated. And so this film is really trying to show you complexities that everybody has. And when you say question these things, there are these philosophical questions, but then there's just like the questions that the film itself is presenting with just battered women, like why would she go back? Why
why can't she be a better friend? Or is it better that she's this way? Why is Larry Hagman joke about beating women?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? But he cheats on his wife, and what does that make him?
Mm.
You know, and that he has some kind of moral virtue here, but not here. Like, why is that? And why is Dennis Weaver seem like this okay person, most not at the party? Obviously, he's really starting to come out there, the Dennis Weaver from The Home. But like, why do I like this guy who beats the crap out of his wife all the time and rapes her? And you know what I mean? And so it's like, it's like, it's doing all of these different things. And it's so that you can understand all the different sides. Yeah. And it's also, you're never going to come to a proper conclusion about society or humanity or the human condition if you don't understand all the different perspectives either. So,
yeah. I guess that's one of the functions of a commercial narrative like Intimate Strangers, right?
I would think so, especially soap operas, because soap operas can introduce a lot of different perspectives. TV movies have to do it in a shorter, like it's short. That's where shorthand really comes into play, right? So, and sometimes it fails. Like, so going back to Don't Be Afraid of the Dark, that's a really interesting one, because that's a movie that's a metaphor about what it's like when you're forced to be a housewife when you don't want to, right? And so it's like the yellow wallpaper in a TV movie, right, with little monsters in your fireplace. But it's like when does that drive you insane? And so Jim Hunt's character, like, he's not nearly as complex as Dennis Weaver, but like, it's introducing things about both sides of the family, like, you know, about how they ended up in the situation that they're in, and why is he the way he is, and like these stresses in life, and like how the pressure changes us or makes us a certain way. Like, I'm getting off topic here, but like, so all these TV movies are dealing with things like in metaphor, but they're all dealing with issues within the domestic space, and they could be coded like in a horror movie, but and then they could be told right in your face, like here. But I think at the heart of it, they're trying to basically reflect America as we knew it.
Mm. Yeah, they're doing that. So in that sense, Don't Be Afraid of the Dark is very similar and not at all off topic. It's very connected.
In some ways, yeah. He's not beating the crap out of her, but it's like... But
it's connected in this larger sense of what the film's actually really about.
Yeah, like for sure, yeah.
The film is about being trapped in a house, even spiritually.
Yes.
You could say that that's almost as bad as Intimate Strangers. Or you could say, you know, not without exactly being as bad, right? It's a form. You know, you could say that's a problem, right? To be.
It's a form of oppression. Yeah, it's like So it's looking at like what happens when you've been forced to conform to a certain kind of life that maybe you don't want to conform to, you know. And so I mean, it obviously becomes a monster movie. So I don't know that the themes stick out as much, but like there's another one that I was talking about. It's called The Strange Possession of Mrs. Oliver with Karen Black, about a woman who's a housewife and she wants to get like a part-time job, like at a store. And her husband, played by George Hamilton, is like, no, you're going to get pregnant and you're going to stay here. And
of course, so George Hamilton would do. It's he's perfect.
And so she goes shopping one day and she sees this sweater and this wig and she puts it on. And when she puts it on, she transforms herself. And then this other Mrs. Oliver ends up going to this little town. She doesn't even know why she's going there, why she's drawn there. There's a whole mystery to it. And she starts doing these things and she's living a different life. And so the movie is a mystery about what happened in Mrs. Oliver's past that is been hidden. But it's also about what happens to a woman when she's being forced to live as a housewife when she doesn't want to do it. Right. And so it's kind of interesting. So yeah, it's not as brutal. Like he's not beating her up or hurting her that way, but she's still oppressed in a different way.
Yeah, I guess it's that general sense of oppression. All these films we're talking about are actually, in that sense, they're kind of all really kind of serious movies. They're serious. They mean business. They're not, you know, again, stereotypically we write off these TV movies. Oh, it's for television or it's commercial, but they mean business. They have integrity. They're about something, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Especially George Hamilton. I haven't thought of him in a long time.
Well, he did a lot of these interesting TV movies. He was in another one called Death Car on the Freeway.
He's on Death Car on the Freeway. Yeah, you mentioned that. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's the oppressive ex-husband.
Yeah.
who wants his wife to not really like have a career, and he's not a bad guy in it, but like he's living in this generation right before hers, right? And where like he's being told, his life has been like the wife stays at home and she does this and she does that. And then Shelley Hack's character is like the generation after, where she's like, no, I want a career. And so you see where the tension comes. They love each other, and he's not a bad person, but he's living in a past world, and he wants her to conform to it, and it's interesting. And it's in Death Car on the Freeway, for frick's sake, it's crazy.
Death Car on the Freeway, exactly. Death Car on the Freeway is not just an action picture by any stretch of the imagination.
No, it's like amazing.
It is amazing. And George Hamilton's amazing. Do you have a favorite George Hamilton? Or is that...
I don't know, but that I've seen him starring in a lot of stuff. I see him in these little TV movies, and even though his part isn't huge, I love The Strange Possession of Mrs. Oliver. Okay. And he's really interesting in it because I'm used to him being this kind of chiseled, sort of really self-aware, kind of cartoony looking guy, and I love in the Strange Possession of Mrs. Oliver, he's not that at all. Like, you can kind of see where the actor is in him. And so I think he does really good in that.
Yeah, it's him doing that, which I guess he doesn't do often, right?
Or like, that's how he's stereotyped. You know what I mean? How we're supposed to see him. When he plays up that role all the time, he loved being like the extra tan, ascot wearing handsome guy, and he was good in comedies, like Love at First Bite, of course, and things like Zorro the Gay Blade, but also he could do other things. And so the TV movie kind of allowed him to do that.
Yeah. TV movies did that for Robert Reed, right? We talked about that, this Secret Night Caller and my everything. I don't even know how to word Robert Reed. Yeah, TV movies really, if anybody wants to discover what a great actor Robert Reed is, they need to go through his TV filmography and watch every single film he made, because they're all incredible. Now, am I to understand that you recently had a dream about Bert Convy? I did, but I don't remember the dream. I just know he was in it. And it's not unusual for me to dream about Bert Convy, I don't think. It happens a lot. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I love him.
Yeah.
He's also a very good actor, and like, again, he has this persona of being like this goofy, fun-loving guy, but like in a lot of TV movies, he played very serious characters and sometimes jokey characters. Yeah. But he did a movie with Robert Reed called Thou Shalt Not Commit Adultery. Oh. And he's this Lothario in it, and he's just sleazy, and it's hilarious to see him in that part because I'm used to him just being like this really sweet guy, but he's very good in it.
That's one I have not seen. I have to see that.
It's flawed, but the acting is pretty good, and it's got Wayne Rogers.
Oh my God! Louise
Fletcher.
Louise Fletcher.
Yeah.
Oh,
it's a good cast, but I don't think it's fully realized. But it's worth a viewing for sure.
Well, sure. I've never seen it. That went under my radar.
Yeah, it was one of, they were going to make a whole bunch of Thou Shalt Not movies, and they did that one, and I think they did one called maybe Thou Shalt Not Kill, which I haven't seen. There's a second one, and they only did the two, and then they never continued with them. So it was part of a potential series that never was fully realized, possibly because it wasn't that great. It had a lot of flaws in the final product.
Like a Ten Commandments type series or something?
Yeah, but like with modern contemporary problems, right? And so it's kind of an interesting approach. Yeah. But it didn't make it past those two films.
Yeah. I guess it's a delicate balance, comedy and drama, right? You're going to do it. Which way you're going to do it?
Right? Yeah.
Because you could do any of those topics comedically.
You could. They went like really melodramatic, I think, with it, and it's really melodramatic. But I like the actors in it quite a bit, and it's definitely worth. I think all TV movies are worth a watch, and that's certainly one of them.
Wayne Rogers, wow,
I love him.
What are some other projects in your degree, which you can have projects in this time that we're in?
I have a couple, but they haven't been announced yet, so I can't really say what they are. But I have two things that are coming up. But I guess the last thing I did that they did announce that I'm really proud of is I wrote the liner notes for Arrow's home video release or Blu-ray of The Last Starfighter, which is coming out in October.
Oh, okay.
And that's a very special film for me. And I was really happy to write about it. And it's kind of hilarious because, so Lance Guest stars in that. And I've actually interviewed Lance Guest for my blog. And I don't know him very well or anything, but he's a real nice guy. But literally a week before I got contacted and offered the chance to write the liner notes, I made a joke about how if I wrote the liner notes for Last Starfighter, it would be about how I should be Lance Guest's wife.
Oh.
And I made a joke, and then literally a week later, I get contacted, and they're like, "Would you like to write the liner notes?" Of course, that's not what I wrote about, but it was just funny. It's one of those dream projects, when you're a teenager and you see a movie and it kind of influences you, and you never think when you're 13 that you're going to do something that involves that film in some meaningful way, And so I was really pleased with that. And I guess before that, earlier in the year, my writing partner, Bill Ackerman, and I did a book about Al Adamson's films, which came out with the Al Adamson box set through Severin. And it's a 126-page book, which is sort of a guide to the production history of Al Adamson's films, which was quite something, because if you're familiar with Al Adamson, you know that he shoots things under multiple titles and then releases them under multiple titles. He sometimes edits his films. He'll take two different films and edit them together and release it as a separate film. And he does all kinds of stuff. And so tying all of the information together was a really fascinating project. And I love Al Adamson's films. They're great. And then Bill and I also did the commentary for Kino Lorber's release of Pray for the Wildcats. This is a TV movie as well. Right. And it was really fun.
Well, to an audience member who's never heard of Al Adamson, what would you say if they have to see their first Al Adamson picture? What are you going to steer them towards? They don't know who. Okay,
that's tough for me because I want to say Dracula versus Frankenstein because that's his most famous film, and I really enjoy that movie. Mm-hmm. But I think his two best movies are Black Heat, and I think that any blaxploitation movie that Al Adamson did is worth seeing. They're all very good. Mm-hmm. Or he did this really weird family movie towards the end of his film career called Carnival Magic.
Oh. And Carnival Magic is about the anti-vivisection subplot and the monkey and
with the talking chimp.
Oh yeah, the chimp saying. The chimp basically has two words. He says, "Oh yeah," or something. Right?
Yeah, he also says something about coconuts when he's got the woman's bra and he goes coconuts, and it's this weird movie. But if you took out the talking chimp, you made him not talk and. Because once he starts talking, you're like, I don't even know what I'm looking at. But it's actually a really sweet film about learning when to let go of someone you love.
It is.
And there's all these different storylines about letting go of somebody and how do you do it? Mm-hmm. And when is it right to do it? Yeah. And so when I saw it, I was really impressed with it. And Al Adamson was murdered. I
forgot that he directed that. So thanks for reminding me. I want to go Carnival Magic vividly. But
he was it was a work for hire, but I mean there was a lot of people involved that he normally worked with. He worked with the same kind of cast of players for a lot of his films. He used the same crew and stuff. And Sam Sherman produced a lot of his films. But I don't think he produced Carnival Magic, but he worked with him a lot. So Al Adamson, about 3 or 4 months before he died, he did an interview. Maybe it's in Wild Beyond Belief. I can't remember. But they were talking to him, and he said that Carnival Magic was a movie that he came to really love and appreciate. And he thought it was, I don't know if he said it was one of his better films, but he really liked it. And years later, he revisited it and really ended up liking it a lot. And he did another family film around the same time. These were his last 2 films. He did a movie called Lost with the same guy who starred in Carnival Magic. And oh my God, what's her name? She's so famous. Sandra Dee.
Oh.
And and it was one of Sandra Dee's last films too. And it's not as good. It's not as good. But it's interesting that he would go on to do family films because his movies were exploitation, and these biker movies like Angels, Wild Women and Black Heat and Death Dimension and Mean Mother, and Dracula versus Frankenstein and Blood of the Ghastly Horror. Like they're not at all like the last couple films he made, but they're charming, and he was a really interesting filmmaker.
Well, my favorite would be Carnival Magic. You're in Austin, Texas, and I know that in the big cities in this country back in the day, a few years ago, Carnival Magic was a big midnight repertory movie. Was it in Austin as well? Were they showing that?
Well, that was before it got here, but the guy who actually rediscovered Carnival Magic and got it on the circuit lives here in Austin. His name's Zach Carlson.
Okay.
And his story is in my book, and I think he also did the commentary on one of the discs, and maybe it was Carnival Magic. So what happened was he worked at a movie theater, and one day they were like, the people who ran the theater were like, we're closing down and you have no notice and you guys are all out of a job. And so they kind of looted the theater, him and his buddies, and they found a film reel for like a can, and it had Carnival Magic written on it.
Oh, wow.
And he took it with him, and he would show it at different places, but he would show it like when bands were playing and stuff. And so nobody realized that the monkey talked.
Oh, wow.
And so one day he just was watching it. He was somewhere and he was like, oh my God, this is the craziest thing. And so he brought it to Austin when he moved here, and he had whoever was running Weird Wednesday at the time, that might have been Lars, I can't remember. And he had Lars show it at the Alamo, and it ended up becoming this huge thing. And then it kind of started spreading out from there. Yeah. But the genesis of its discovery actually was here in Austin.
Well, that's something to be proud of. I did not know that. So it's not even just, it's before Lars. Lars is later on the story.
Yeah.
It has roots in, I guess, a film theater closing.
Yeah, and I think that was in Seattle or Portland, somewhere in Pacific Northwest. Yeah, so it traveled here, and then it kind of got discovered from there.
Yeah, and it became a big thing.
Yeah, but I love it. I can't recommend it enough.
Yeah, it's not. I don't know if it's for everybody. I mean, Carnival Magic.
It's a weird one. But it's interesting because, like, it did play at the theater here recently when I was writing the book. So it was perfect timing, and I went and saw it on the big screen. And it was the audience interpretation of it and acceptance of it was really nice because it is a goofy movie and it's strange. But like at the end, we were all kind of emotionally attached to that freaking chimp. And and there's that scene where Markov, the human that takes care of him, is holding Alex the chimp. And what's so interesting about it is Al Adamson got the camera shot kind of off. So Markov and the chimp are sort of not in the frame properly. Right. But for whatever reason, to me, that's the most moving image in the film. Yeah. And I think it was an accident that he caught it that way. Yeah. But it really worked, and it's just a good movie. I just really liked it. Well,
it gives a documentary feel to the shooting, right? It's interesting thing about that film is that it is sort of an action movie, but it ends up having this documentary.
Well, it's got a lot of heart in it, and it's just sweet. I just really liked it. I was very taken with it.
The car chase is amazing.
Oh, the car chase is awesome. I think the girl that's in the back of the car, this was like the only movie she did. And I think it actually says at the beginning of the film, introducing so-and-so is like girl in car.
Yeah. I wish they had put it in more movies, but what can I tell you?
She's just like yelling, there's a chimp driving, whatever she does. It's just hilarious. She thinks it's her boyfriend. Oh. She looks over and there's this chimp driving to her car. It's so weird. It's such an interesting, all of Al Adamson's movies are kind of like that. They're interesting. Like they're not going to be what you're expecting.
Yeah. So you got to talk to him for your book.
Oh,
that's great.
No, Al Adamson died.
Okay.
Yeah, he was murdered in the 90s. Oh, and so the guy who runs Severin made a documentary about him. And so he just decided to put as many of the movies he could get the rights to in a box set. And so he released this amazing box set that came out earlier this year with our book.
Well, that's important. I like people. Yeah. I like the people to get that. And where should they get it? They go to Amazon or go to
Yeah, they can go to Amazon because it sold out through Severin. So it might be a little harder to find. It actually sold. I couldn't believe how fast it sold because it was $170, but it's also for like 31 films. So it's not so bad. Yeah.
It's for the true Al Adamson aficionados.
Yes. Or aficionados to be because it's as complete as it'll ever be. So.
Well, Amanda Reyes, it's been really great talking with you.
It's been great.
It's our second time doing this. Are there any movies that you want to discuss? I picked Intimate Strangers. In the future, is there a movie that you say, I want to do this film? Emphatically.
I don't know. I'd have to think about it. I mean, there's a lot of movies I want to talk about.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think if any stick out because we were to kind of discuss family sins.
Mm-hmm.
So that might be an interesting one, but we've kind of done it. I'll have to think about it.
Well, I'm definitely up for family sins.
Oh, cool.
I'm up for The Day the Loving Stopped because it's Valley Harper and Dennis Weaver.
Yeah, I haven't seen that.
So
I totally would see that.
Let's do that one.
Okay.
We'll make it The Day the Loving Stopped. I think it's 81. I think 82. I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting because they did Don't Go to Sleep together as well. And that's why I know of The Day the Loving Stopped because they did 2 TV movies together. But I just haven't, it just kind of has slipped me since my discovery of it.
Well, Amanda, thank you again for being on this podcast and be safe there in Austin.
You too.
And I look forward to discussing The Day Loving Stopped next time we meet.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't like goodbyes, so I'll see you soon, folks. Thank you.